1 in 5 police officers in England and Wales say they're planning to quit the force within the next 2 years. That's according to a new survey by the Police Federation. Joining me now to discuss this is former Met Police Detective Hamish Brown, MBE. Good morning to you, Hamish. Talk about this in the office this morning. You think, well, 1 in 5 and it's 22%. That's of the respondents. That sounds pretty high. But I'm wondering, actually, if that is just the norm in most jobs. That about a fifth of people are saying, oh, I'm going to leave in the next few years. Is this worse than it's ever been?
Yes, well, good morning to you, Julia. Well, there are a few things here. Yes, there is a turnover in the police and things have changed quite dramatically in the job market and society as a whole. You know, when I first joined all those years ago, it was in effect, job for life. That was your career, and you put your head down and did your 30 plus years, which is what I did. That was the norm. But things have changed now. People are coming in looking for just a few years. It looks good on the CV, that sort of thing, so they can pick and choose. And the difficulty is when you've got that sort of attitude, I just wonder what motivates some people. Some people are brilliant and they're there for a few years. That's absolutely great. But have they looked through the reality of the situation? The messy scenes you're going to come across, not very nice. There's the psychological thing, telling a lady that her husband won't be coming home again.
Yeah.
That is very, very hard. So are the officers up to that sort of pressure?
Yeah.
The shift work. And in fact, there's a stigma with being a police officer. Sometimes you're held in high regard, but in other instances, people tend not to like the police.
No,
Or some
I was
people
thinking that.
like
I mean, when you're looking at different careers, it's a young person looking for a job now. You know, in terms of the status you used to have as a police officer, and the career prospect, and the sort of lifestyle you've had, very, very different. And especially when a lot of your maybe your peers from a lot, we know a lot going from university now or from school, they're able to do working from home a couple of days a week, and you have to be on the beat every day. And as you say, in very difficult circumstances. I've got very good friends who are police officers, and the stories they tell me, absolutely. I mean, it's not what most of us ever have to put up with in our daily jobs. But I know that morale among police officers, because I know people come up to me in the street, police officers, people get in touch all the time, is so low about what they're being asked to do, how they're basically now, social services as well as the police force. And that's been something that some police chiefs have raised as well. But feeling that, again, when we talked about this earlier, all of this sort of, there's this woke stuff, and they feel like they're not able to do the job they want to do, which is to keep the streets safe, go after the wrong uns and arrest them. And they're just sitting there doing paperwork. They're dealing with, people who are mentally ill, and they just feel it's not the job they signed up to anymore.
Yeah, you make a very good point there, Julia. And I think the difficulty is that sometimes perhaps the police officers feel they're responsible for the country's ills, the nation's problems, which they're most certainly not. And if they find themselves at a political demonstration, I'll go no further than that, that they tend to come under attack because you weren't fair to them, you weren't fair to this, that, the other. And they're between a rock and a hard place, and they're just trying to keep the peace. It's as simple as that. So they are under pressure, and those coming into the police must understand you're going to face that, and you can be a little bit disillusioned. And I think this is part of the recruiting process. What do you expect from the police? And some people go in, think within a few weeks they'll be driving police cars around 100 miles an hour or something like that. Well, it doesn't work that way. It can be very boring, laborious work, and it can be long hours, and things can be very difficult. But you know that there's so much pleasure you can take, even from dealing with the most sticky, horrible problems, and you get a very, I don't know, professional pride from doing a good job.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's what people should look to.
Even when they're dealing with difficult things and dealing with, grooming gangs, rescuing people from burning buildings and things, it must be an incredibly rewarding job. And yet, we know, you say, difficult to recruit. We had a massive recruitment issue where governments didn't recruit enough people. We lost a lot of very experienced officers we've lost them for all of their expertise and experience for years, forever now. But it's difficult to recruit people now and to retain people now. The only thing that seems to keep a lot of officers in the job right now, even though they're sort of despondent about the direction of policing, is, well, if you do your 30 years, you get your full pension, you can go on, do something else with that sort of 20, 25 grand a year guaranteed pension, which, let's face it, most people don't get in their early 50s, but police officers do. And I think a lot of people would argue quite rightly after seeing the work they do. But what is the solution? How do we boost morale? How do we make sure that people want to be police officers and the people who are already there want to stay?
Well, there are two issues. I've mentioned the recruitment and getting the right people in so they know exactly what they're going to take on. And secondly, it's the retention, which you've touched on, losing those experienced officers. It's sometimes 1 year people go, well, they're just, it's not what they thought and left. But 11 years, now that is worrying because you've got quite an experienced police officer then, and you want to keep those. Now, in the late 70s, the Lord Edmund Davis report came in, and it was aimed at the rewards being higher for the longer you stayed in. And I think it's going to need something like that, an inducement to keep those experienced officers in before they go looking elsewhere.
Thank you.
It's a very good point. That experience, that help to younger officers is absolutely crucial, and you need to keep your workforce together.
Absolutely. Hamish Brown, MBE, former Met Police Detective, thank you for your thoughts on that. Let's come to Benedict Spence. I mean, look, police have had a very rough ride in recent years in terms of the politicisation, the policing, a lot of the woke nonsense, which I know most officers on the ground are horrified by it as well. But also, of course, Wayne Couzens and other officers being found guilty of the most heinous crimes, particularly, these massive investigations into whether or not the right, particularly men, were being recruited and retained in the force. How do we resolve this problem?
I think, as you say, the police have been in for a tough time, and their lives has not been necessarily made easier, I think, by their political masters, who don't necessarily prioritise the things that you would hope a police force would be there to prioritise, and that is upholding people's rights, law and order, things like attending burglaries, thefts, and actually investigating these sorts of things. I think when you look at the sheer number of those kind of low-level crimes that go unsolved, and also when you look at the number of, for example, sexual assaults and crimes of that nature that don't get thoroughly investigated, you have to see, if you want to sort of rebuild trust in the police and actually get it to a position where it's still considered a good career path to take, there needs to be a reorganisation of what the priorities of the police are for the public to trust them.
And it's not hurty tweets, everybody.
Exactly.
Just, FYI.